I'm Ms. Jackson coming to you with another video.
Okay, the first trig graph that I want to talk about is the sine graph. All right, the sine graph is what we call a parent graph, and we do a lot of translations and transformation from this parent graph. So our angle 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi comes from the unit circle. So if you were looking at the unit circle, if you're at 0 degrees or 0 radians, then your sine for that angle would be 0. If you're at pi over 2, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. If you're at pi, the sine of pi is 0. If you're at 3 pi over 2, the sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1. And if you are at 2 pi, which is one full rotation around the unit circle, then your sine would be 0. So from the unit circle, we plot the angles, which are called the quadrantal angles. So I'm going to just make a T table over here, and we can kind of fill those values in. So these are the X values are the angles, and the Y value would be the sine of those angles. So we had 0, and then 1, and then 0, -1, and 0. So this is why my graph looks like this. All right, so this is actually one period of the graph, and the graph goes on forever in both directions. All right, so it can continue on forever in both directions. So yeah, so it can kind of try to make some dotted lines so you can actually see this, but it continues on forever in both directions. Okay. Also, the amplitude is the distance that 1/2 the distance, the max minus the minimum point. So this is my maximum point, which is 1, and my minimum point is -1. And let me extend the x-axis for a second. So the distance from the max point all the way down is going to be the amplitude. So again, I can draw this. That would be the amplitude, and also the distance from the minimum point to the x-axis is that same distance. So this would be the amplitude here. That's one way of finding it, and also the amplitude here. All right. There's an algebraic way of finding the amplitude, and that equation would be 1/2 the maximum point, which is the maximum y value, minus the minimum y value. And that is 1/2 times the maximum y value is 1 minus the minimum y value is -1. So it'd be 1 minus -1, which is 1/2 of 1 plus 1. Two negatives make a positive. So it'd be 1/2 of 2, which is equal to 1. So that would be the amplitude. The period of any sine graph is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. And b is the coefficient of the x variable. So there's a understood 1 in front of the x in the sine function. So the period of this graph would be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1, which is 2 pi, over 1, which is just 2 pi. All right. And the 5 key points on the graph, are at 0, 0, this is an x-intercept because it crosses the graph crosses the x-axis. This would be my maximum point. The ordered pair here is pi over 2, 1. At pi, this is an x-intercept because the graph crosses the x-axis. At 3 pi over 2 would be my maximum point. I'm sorry, my minimum point. Sorry about that. My minimum point, which is 3 pi over 2, -1. And 2 pi would be my x-intercept. So my x-intercept ordered pairs would be 2 pi, 2 pi comma 0. And then you have pi comma 0. And then you have 0, 0. So those are the 5 key points on the graph. Okay.